These days, I love to sing the song "The Greatness of God," titled "Greatness of God." And there's one line from this song that says, "All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good." So this is our confession to our God. He has been faithful and He has been so good to us. And in the Bible and in our testimonies, good, when it's used with God, a lot of times it means that He has been faithful. We don't use good to God as if we use good boy or good girl. We are always using good to God when we confess that everything we enjoy, everything we have is given from God. God has given everything to us. He has been faithful in providing everything. So we use good in that context. Martyr and a leader of early church, Polycarp, he was killed in his old age. He was a disciple of St. John. So he was not far from Jesus. Maybe he died in 2nd century or 3rd century. And in his later life, the persecution toward Christianity has gotten worse. And Roman officials had him in trial, the Polycarp in trial, because the Roman officials knew that the importance of the leadership, that if they betray Jesus, that all the congregation, all the people, followers of Jesus would deny Jesus as well. They thought that. So they had Polycarp on trial and asked him to deny Jesus. But Polycarp did not. After many trials, Roman officials almost begged him, just say one time, "I deny Jesus. I don't care how you live later, but just say one time that you deny Jesus." But what Polycarp said to the official is this. He says, 86 years I have served him, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my King and my Savior? That is Polycarp's answer. That is the same as when we sing, "All my life you have been faithful." We have to be able to confess the same confession as martyr Polycarp did. One of the tragedies in the modern times is that we don't see God's hand in our lives. We confess through our mouths that we depend on God and God has given everything. But in our lives, we rely more on doctors than Jesus. We rely more on teachers than Jesus. We rely more infrastructure of the society than God, who is a provider of everything. Of course, all these things are common grace God has given to us. But this common grace has become so thick that we cannot see what is beyond. So in order to see that God is faithful, we have to have this sense that through this thickness, we have to be able to see God working behind the scene. When you see that God working faithfully, you may be able to say that all my life you have been faithful. You have been good to me. So whenever we say faithful and good, we want it to be concrete. We want it to be detailed. We don't want to just say you are faithful, but we want to say you are faithful in this way and that way. We want to see God working through this common grace. When we do that, we may stand before the enemy and say the same confession that Polycarp did. I have served him, and he has done to me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my King and my Savior? That is our purpose. That is a goal that we want to live. Martyr, the origin of the term is martyria. It means to witness. So it didn't mean necessarily to be killed or to die. It's a witness. So in this meaning, we all have to be martyr for God. We have to witness God's faithfulness in our lives. The life of witness, life of martyr, is to make God known. We want to make God known in our lives. We want to make God known between our friends. We want to make God known in our work field and marketplace. That's what Paul and his friends did. After they finished first ministry in Philippi, the first city in Europe, now they moved on to different cities. First Thessalonica, and they went to Berea, and now Athens. Especially in Thessalonica and Berea, there were Jewish synagogues. So as their custom, Paul and his friend went into the synagogue and proclaimed Jesus from the Old Testament. But the persecution got worse. So Paul had to flee to Athens alone. And he had to wait his friend to come from Berea. So now he is in Athens alone. There was no Jewish synagogue. Athens was different from the cities that they visited before. Athens was a center of Greek philosophy and Greek myth. It is a center of knowledge and wisdom in ancient days. All the people who lived there, they were interested in spending time the latest ideas and latest philosophies. All their concern was about filling their head knowledge, but not to change their lives according to the wisdom they just listened. So even if they are interested in Paul's teaching, they were not to change their lives, but to have one more God to be in their pantheon. So they just collected all the gods in their temple, and our Jehovah God was going to be one more God in their temple. Paul was greatly distressed in that city because he saw what is behind their interest. He walked around the city of Athens and he saw many people worshiping gods. They were full of gods and they were religious. And even they worshiped God which was unknown to them. So Paul saw that they are religious, but Paul was greatly distressed because all they worshiped was false gods, idols. Because he was able to see that they are worshiping false gods, he was greatly distressed in this great city, Athens. In verse 16, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed. Paul is now going to tell them, you have been worshiping God whom you did not know. But now I'm going to tell you the ultimate God who created everything and who sent his own Son for us. Paul, when he came to Jewish people, he proclaimed the gospel starting from the Old Testament. Because the Old Testament was this ultimate source of authority, Paul argued from the Old Testament. But when Paul came to non-Jewish people, Greek people, he started his conversation from philosophy. He is quoting two philosophers in chapter 17. And from these philosophers' words, he is saying that the ultimate being is personal being. And this personal being wants to make relationship with us. And we have our existence in him. Paul is claiming that. Verse 28, for in him we live and move and have our being. This is a quote of philosopher Epimenides, Greek philosopher. It says that we don't exist by accident. We have purpose. We are here because we have purpose. And there's ultimate being that supports our being in this universe. And this ultimate being is personal. We have our parents, and the parents have their parents, and the parents and parents. If you trace back all the way to the origin, then you would have this ultimate source of being. In Greek philosophy, they called it the immovable mover. So this mover has to move others, but it didn't have. It has to move others, but it should not be moved by others. In philosophy, normally it is described as certain power and certain idea of or wisdom. Because Greek philosophy, they thought the human, our character, our nature is very limited and sinful. So they could not stand the idea of ultimate being has personal character. But Paul was able to find one quote from the Greek philosopher describing this ultimate being as personal, using the pronoun him. So Paul is now asking back to them, look at this Greek philosopher that you liked, your ultimate source, that he was referring the ultimate being as him. Then Paul is asking, then isn't the ultimate being be personal? And there, Paul is telling them this ultimate being sent his own son for us. Now we can see Paul speaking their language because philosophy was their language in Greek time. So Paul was speaking their language. Paul did not go to them, look at this Old Testament. According to the prophecy, Jesus is the Messiah. He didn't say that. Paul was concerning to their wisdom, philosophy. In verse 29, it says, we are his offspring. This is another quote of Stoic philosopher Aratus. So in his first quote, Paul was making clear that the ultimate being is personal being. Now in his second quote, Paul is proving that this ultimate being has personal relationship with us. We are his offspring. We are his descendant. We are his children. That we must have personal relationship with the ultimate being. So Paul is saying to them, we human beings, we are similar to the ultimate being that you are worshiping. Humanity similar to the divinity. This was not foreign to Athens. Because in Greek philosophy, they had Greek myth, they had similar idea of gods formed in human being. The gods, they were jealous, they fought, they killed each other, and they lied. All these human characters, Greek gods, shared with humans. But when Paul said, we are his offspring, then we share some characteristic with the divinity, Paul was saying totally different things. Because he starts from God. Paul first presents who God is, and then Paul tells us that we share his character, his holy and blameless character. Whereas Greek myths, they observed human people, human society, and they found all the flaws and blames from human society. They project those characters to God. So Greek myth, look at the people first, look at human first, and then project all these traits to their divinity. But Paul looked at God first and found some similarities between God and us. So Paul preached to Athens was not God who shared limitations and weakness as we have. ultimate being that is personal, and that God who shares many things with us. This concept, in a way, familiar to Athens people, but it was also very new to them. Verse 23, Paul, as he walked in the Athens street, he saw an inscription that says, "To the unknown God." They worshipped unknown God because they were religious. There were many gods in Athens. When they had no rain, they worshipped Zeus, who was god of rain. When they went on war, they worshipped the god of war, Ares. Then they planted the seed, they worshipped the god of prosper. And for having children, they worship God of prosperous again, Aphrodite, God of love and beauty. And when there was an earthquake, they worship God of earthquake, Poseidon. And then after they have all these gods lined up for their benefit, now they think, did we get everything covered? And then they were afraid if there were certain things that their God cannot cover. So they came up with this idea of worshiping unknown God to protect all the unknown disasters, unknown misfortunes in their lives. Protect us from those dangers. And Paul saw that, and he found the contact point to preach the gospel. Of course, Paul is not presenting God as one of those Greek gods. He's not introducing our Jehovah God as 13th God of Greek myth. What Paul was trying to do was that you wanted to worship God and protection in your lives, but believe God, who is the ultimate source of our being, ultimate creator of us. Worship that God. And Paul is saying that we share the ultimate God's character. How amazing it is. So from their notion of unknown God, which was very impersonal, which was very abstract, Paul is now leading them to personal and relational God, our Jehovah God. Here we are able to see how God is leading them from their interest, from their language, to fuller understanding of God. Paul did not have to be perfect from the get-go, because we see the stages of making God known to the people who doesn't know God. First, starting from their life situation and speak their language. Second, but do not stop there, but lead them to the fuller knowledge of God. First, Paul spoke their language, not only in the Greek, but he was able to speak philosophy, their language. He was able to start their setting in life. He was quoting the philosophers and draw some Christian conclusion out of those philosophies. This is what he meant in somewhere else in the Bible when he said, I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. He became all things to all people. Because Paul learned it from Christ, who was very humble to become human form. He was very nature of God, but he did not consider it his. And Jesus took the human form and became human. And he walked among us, and he spoke human language. Paul learned it from Jesus, and now he's practicing it in his mission. That is the meaning of incarnation. God became human. Even though we're not God, God is asking us to incarnate into the context of the people that we are preaching the gospel. We have to be able to speak their language. We have to be able to meet their interest. We have to be able to speak what they are interested in. We have to be able to go their life settings. But Paul did not stop there, and he led people to the next stage, to the fuller knowledge of God. From the inscription that says unknown God, Paul is leading them to known God. Their impersonal God, Paul is leading them to personal God. From their abstract God, Paul is leading them to relational God. Verse 23, this is what I am going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and death and everything else. From one man he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed time in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him. So Paul is leading them from this lesser knowledge to the fuller knowledge of God. And our relationship with our VIPs must be the same. We must spend our time with them. We must have conversation with them. We must be able to speak the topics they are interested in. We must participate in their meetings. But through all this, we have to be awake and find the opportunity to proclaim the gospel. God did not call us to become like them. God called us to make them become like Christians. So we have to be awake while we participate in relationship. We have to be awake and find opportunity to have spiritual conversation and introduce God. But in order to introduce personal and relational God, we first have to be personal with God. We have to have this personal relationship with God. We cannot go out and evangelize others with the experience that we had 20 years ago. We cannot go out and introduce God who we met 10 years ago. We have to be up to date with our God relationship. So we have to spend time and have conversation with God and listen to Him and have our prayer requests answered by Him. We have to be awake. We have to keep our personal relationship with God. If you don't have that experience, how can you preach gospel? How can you introduce God? Your testimonies, your witness to them, sometimes may be immature and sometimes doesn't make sense in theological sense. But do not be afraid of those things. You just go out and share the testimony that God has worked in your lives. You don't have to be accurate and precise theologically because you're not giving them theology lectures. You're not preaching them, but you are sharing your life's experience with God. Think about this. If unlimited divine being has come to us, limited human being, can we, in our own language, can we fully describe this event? The perfect God event in our lives. We cannot. God did not expect us to be theologically perfect in our sharing of the gospel. You just go out and full of errors, just go out and share how God has worked in your life. When Paul introduced God from the inscription of unknown God. He might have this danger of introducing them, Jehovah God, as 13th God. Maybe if theologians in his time saw him preaching the gospel through that point, theologians would find many theological errors in his approach. But what God is interested in is sharing the gospel. What God is interested in is sharing God event in your life. Because we are standing before VIPs as evangelizers and as martyrs, but not as theologians and preachers. We have to be alert, we have to be awake, and we have to be sensitive, finding opportunity to proclaim personal and relational God. Paul is adding one more step here. First step was speak their own language and meet them in their life setting. Second was introduce personal and relational God. And Paul is adding one more step here, which is don't be afraid to be stumbling block. Paul knew that God and Jesus he is delivering to them can be stumbling block. But he wasn't shy away from preaching that. If you think our time, if you go to Greek society in first century, two things that dominated their life were philosophy and myth. Their philosophy was top tier among the world. And their myth also was great. And those two things formed their lives. According to philosophy, they live their lives. According to the myth, they form their lives. So philosophy and myth. You do not want to attack those things if you want to hang out with them. But Paul, here in chapter 17, he attacked directly to these things. First, by saying, do not worship idols, he was attacking Greek myth. He was risking to be stumbling block to those who follow Greek myth. Verse 29, therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image by human design and skill. So Paul is saying that what you are worshiping are not gods. Those are just human design and made by human hands. So for those who fully devote their lives worshiping in those gods, Paul is saying those are not gods. Paul was very direct in saying that those are not gods. Those are idols. And then second, he was attacking Greek philosophy when he delivered the message of the resurrected Jesus. Because in Greek philosophy, bodily resurrection was not fully acknowledged because they always considered body as a prison of soul or very weak and limited being. So there's no good being resurrected in bodily form. They always look down on body. But Paul was proclaiming the resurrection of the body to these Greek philosophers. Verse 31, he says, he has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, their reaction was, some of them sneered. They sneered at the resurrection of the body. So Paul is attacking those two dominating worldview of Greek people, Greek myth and Greek philosophy. Like Paul, we have to be bold when we proclaim the gospel. Of course, we have to be careful and speak their own language and start from where they are. But at the end of the day, the gospel that we are proclaiming is a stumbling block to them. We have to know that fact. There's no such a thing as natural progression of becoming Christian. They cannot become Christian by step. They have to reap of the faith. Because it is a stumbling block for everyone. So no matter how much effort we put in proclaiming gospel, we have to know that, and we must not be afraid to give them a stumbling block. When you know what happens when you evangelize others? If you consider those things, not worship idols, bodily resurrection of Jesus, if you consider yourself, it's a stumbling block. They would consider it a stumbling block. If you are hesitant, go out and, this is a gospel that you might want to hear. But if you consider it a stumbling block and hide this resurrection message to them, they know that it is a stumbling block. But if you fully believed in that, if you fully experienced the bodily resurrection of Jesus in your life, and then that is no longer be a stumbling block in your conversation. So Paul in Athens, he saw that people were religious and worshiping idols and worshiping God, even unknown God. But Paul started conversation in their own language. So speak their language. But he was awake. He was very sensitive, grabbing the opportunity of evangelism. So when he had time, he started this conversation and presented personal and relational God. Because Paul had this personal relationship with God. But in evangelism, there must be a time that we have to be bold, proclaiming the gospel, even though it is a stumbling block. We have to challenge them. We have to challenge them to take the leap of faith and devote their lives to God, and their lives be changed radically. If their life is not changed radically, what is the meaning of the gospel for them? So we want their lives to be changed and fully devoted to God. Do not be afraid to be a stumbling block. So from Paul's story, we see an example of being a martyr. Not necessarily be killed, but be witness of the gospel. So likewise, we want in our lives be witness. We want to present personal and relation God to others. So think about your VIPs. Think about the people that you know around you, and think about the possible potential VIPs. If you do not know how to start conversation with them, pray to God, give us wisdom and give us the opportunity to start conversation. Let us pray. Even though I preach on this issue, honestly, I still struggle of having conversation with non-believers and introducing Jesus and God to them. Maybe because I lack personal relationship with God. Maybe because I lack boldness to proclaim the gospel. But I invite you to this journey of evangelizing people and saving souls. Humbly, I invite you to this journey. When you pray that God would give us the knowledge and give us wisdom to speak their language, to find the contact point. But also pray that make us bold enough to present gospel, and pray that we have personal relationship with you in our lives, so that when we preach, we do not preach out of knowledge, but preach out of experience. Let us pray.